Hi, so this is a quick recording over Chapter 8, which is the first chapter in Unit 3. And I'm looking at the Prezi outline, if that helps. And we are going to skip past Unit 1 and all those, and we'll go straight to Unit 3. And the first chapter, which basically is the start of rock and roll. An important name in this is Alan Freed. He's an early 50s DJ. And he actually is credited with the term rock and roll. Read about him, including the payola scandal, which he was involved with. There'll be some questions with that. The 50s also had a marvelous growth in the music industry. It's no longer just New York or LA. We're including Chicago, Cincinnati, Nashville, Memphis, New Orleans as all big centers of the music industry. There's a large section in the book about covers, which is that word that you see there on the screen, which is just basically talking about taking somebody else's music and making your own version of it. You've heard this term before, but it is a test question, so you might look that up also. Very much a young person's music at this time. Previous popular music was geared maybe towards the parents and middle class people, but now music is being geared more towards the youthful audience and definitely to the expendable income that is the kids have. One of the first rock and roll performers, or as labeled as rock and roll, was probably Bill Haley and the Comets. Probably you know them from Happy Days and Rock Around the Clock and whatnot. There is arguments about that, though. Some people think Louis Jordan and Choo Choo Boogie, those were some of the earliest rock and rolls. But, you know, it's open to interpretation, and the book goes on to that about. Also look into maybe some of these artists. They divided up, actually, the rock and roll into country style and R&B style. Country style is typically Elvis and his group, the Jordanaires, Buddy Holly and the Crickets. It's got a little bit of country flavor with it. The more R&B would be Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Fats Domino. And each one of those guys is slightly different, and you should read up about them. They're very different, actually. And you can get a better feel by listening to the music on that. Most people have heard stories or know about the plane crash with Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper. That's covered in the book a little bit. But a lot of these artists, just had a huge influence at the time, and it was an incredibly horrible moment when that plane crash happened. Again, take a look at the difference between Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Fats Domino, because they're just very different performers, even though they're all listed under R&B. La Bamba is Richie Valens' most famous song. Take a listen to that and see. Also, check out Buddy Holly and his contribution to studio tricks, such as overdubbing and double tracking. You might want to read about where he got his name, the Crickets, too. That's kind of a cute story. And then the book goes into the wild young women of rock. The most seminal one is probably Wanda Jackson. Listen to that recording of hers, and you'll get a good idea of that kind of rockabilly sound that we're talking about. And there's a list of early female rockers. Write those down, know them, because it'll be a test question. Connie Francis and Brenda Lee are in there, but they're more the pop kind of a sound and not so much rock and roll. But they're part of that group. Early songwriters of this time was listed there, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. There's a nice little section about them. Not as important, but very important as far as how they created the sounds for many people like Elvis and the Coasters and the Drifters. Other than that, that's mostly what you want to read about in that chapter. There are still your standard pop icons like Johnny Mathis, Frank Sinatra, and the Kingston Trio. But that would be chapter 8.